An ominous entity hangs over the realm of Smash Brothers. Its existence unmistakable, a constant presence in the minds of the people. Some fixate on it, seeing in it a sign of impending doom, or perhaps personal gain. Others try to ignore it, going about their daily lives, hoping for something to dispel it and make everything calm and normal again. But as we draw ever closer to Ultimate's release, its impact will be felt more and more as our own little civilization teeters on the brink of madness and savagery. I speak, of course, of roster leaks and rumors. Don't worry, I won't go into specifics. If you're worried about inadvertently being spoiled, you can rest easy here. But it's the impact such things have, and have always had in the Smash community, that is so fascinating, in a morbid sort of fashion. Everyone reacts to them in their own individual way, and whenever any specific ones gain any credibility, it's always led to fans panicking as if, well, the world was ending. Anyone who was around for Smash 4 saw that front and center. Twice. Smash is such a giant-sized deal that we see people getting emotionally invested and hoping their favorite characters join the fight in a way far beyond any other massive crossover I've ever seen. And so when something comes along to potentially put a dagger in those hopes prematurely, it can feel like part of your whole motivation has been ripped out and stomped on. No wonder rumor talk can be such a point of contention. And especially when it comes to Smash, these things can have very far-reaching consequences. Roster speculation starts to revolve around potential leaks and whether they're legitimate or not. Particularly credible ones can even stifle discussion about any character not mentioned in them. In some ways, it can even bring out the worst in everyone involved, as the fandom splits off into tribes based on what they believe or hope to be true, and everyone becomes tempted, compelled to relentlessly attack anyone who isn't on their side. You even get people jumping on bandwagons so they can be seen supporting the quote-quote winning side, or even just because they want the opportunity to rub it in the faces of anyone who didn't defect with them. And yet, sometimes these rumors aren't all bad. Sometimes they can actually get people to seriously consider a character they never thought had a chance before, someone they'd never thought was worth supporting. With how often we stick to our guns and refuse to look beyond what we already know, it can be a silver lining of sorts in such trying times. And that brings us to our challenger. This character has had a following for a long time, but was never really thought of as a potential Smash candidate, until an at-the-time credible rumor name-dropped him. While his fate is currently unknown, perhaps it may not be so terrible after all. Skull Kid is, well, technically there isn't just one. The Skull Kids are a race of forest spirits of sorts who reside in Hyrule's Lost Woods, often seen playing music or performing acts of mischief. They tend to antagonize adults, but are actually quite friendly to children. Perhaps it's because, according to legend, they're actually the undead spirits of children who get lost and die in the woods. But this particular Skull Kid we're looking at today is quite special, or at least he became special one fateful day when he ambushed a traveling mask salesman and stole a very particular possession, one that, as it turned out, contained the soul of a mad, evil, and very powerful entity. Under the influence of Majora's Mask, he became a living nightmare hell-bent on causing as much pain and suffering as possible, culminating in kickstarting the apocalypse by setting the moon on a 3-day crash course with the realm of Termina, and it's up to Link to stop it. So, is Skull Kid actually a big enough deal to be considered for Smash? Well, he's a very unusual antagonist from an equally unusual and off-kilter game, and perhaps that is why both are so highly regarded. He causes massive turmoil for the people of Termina, from the obvious to more regional issues like a cold snap that endangers a local Goron population, to even something as petty as transforming a grown man into a child to ruin his upcoming wedding. Despite all the power at Skull Kid's fingertips, it's all the same pranks and tantrums as before, just on a cosmic scale and with even less regard for his victims' well-being. It really is as if an irresponsible child got his hands on the power of a god. And yet, the demon Majora is still present within the mask, subtly manipulating Skull Kid and using him as a tool to lash out at the world and create the destruction it so desires. It's an odd combination, and so it's no wonder the duo has become so memorable among Zelda fans. and with how highly regarded their game is, the argument could be made that Skull Kid might be prominent enough to have been considered for Smash. But there's a reason why he's been getting talked about this time around. A certain set of rumors that certain circumstances brought to the forefront for a while suggested that he's playable in Ultimate. Not gonna name names or post screen caps for the sake of the people who want to avoid leak talk and don't want to risk being potentially spoiled of more stuff, but if you followed speculation, you've probably heard. While the source of said rumors has lost some credibility in the time since, there may still be something to their earlier claims, and so maybe Skull Kid shouldn't be dismissed quite yet. And that's the thing, because if it were just a rumor backing him, I don't think he'd have caught on quite so much because he isn't the type of character people were expecting to see. But you see, there may actually be reasons beyond this certain rumor that are pointing toward him. I mean, isn't it curious that he's a no-show from the list of assist trophies so far, with the moon itself showing up instead? Well, that's not a sure thing on its own, as we've seen other summons show up over time. It's interesting. And not only that, but based on the fact that the very first steps of Ultimate's development kicked off at the end of 2015, Skull Kid would have been relevant around then. The remake of Majora's Mask released the previous February, and while I figure it probably took a few months to get the list of newcomers ironed out, it has still been a notable title at that point. And there are certain other conspiracy theories that are a bit more out there, but damned if I know if they mean anything. It's nothing concrete, but I think that with all of this stuff combined, maybe Skull Kid does have a greater chance than we've given him credit for, at least to where he's worth giving a fair shake. So, let's take a look beyond the mask. How do we capture the feel of a trickster figure acting in tandem with a mad god? If fate were to align, what would Skull Kid be like in Smash? His appearance would be easy enough, using his updated design from Majora's Mask 3D as a basis and adding extra details to his outfit. Nothing too crazy, just stuff like finer textures for his clothes or mysterious scratch marks on the mask. His render from Hyrule Warriors gives a pretty good idea of what he could look like, though the Smash team wouldn't actually use this render since Koei Tecmo isn't involved in Smash development. Alternate palettes could pull from several places, like various Zelda bosses and antagonists, some foresty color schemes, or maybe generic red or blue palettes for the sake of having the option. Skull Kid's animation should reflect this forbidden power that he, sort of, has under his control. He'd stand on the ground when idle and walk normally, but his run animation would have him float under the mask's power. Or more specifically, it actually looked like the mask itself was the one pulling him forward. This odd set of traits would also come up in places like maybe a crouch animation where he'd squat and look at the ground intently, or one idle animation where the eyes of the mask would suddenly glow in unsettling fashion. Now let's talk about some of the details to Skull Kid's concept. Playing as him should be all about toying with your opponents and aggravating them until you catch them off guard. To that end, we want to build him to be all about using mix-ups and being opportunistic. Skull Kid wouldn't have the oppressive movement or frame data to overpower opponents outright, so he'd want to poke at them carefully while keeping some tricks up his sleeve to win neutral with. But compared to more straightforward characters, his attacks would generally have better range and or deal more damage in comparison, so he'd be rewarded more when he does have the upper hand. This surprise factor would also tie into his disadvantage state, with actually pretty good options for escaping bad situations that make him a pain in the ass to pin down, up to and including vanishing during his dodges like Rosalina and Palutena do. Far as his actual stats go, they make him seem more pedestrian than he actually is. Size-wise, he's right around the middle, similar in stature to Mario and the Mii fighters. His mediocre grounded movement is one of the reasons why he wants to focus on mix-ups for his offense instead of rushing people down, though he makes up for it by being pretty fast in the air. He'd also have high air acceleration, a stat that determines how quickly you reach your max airspeed. This would make it easier for him to turn around in the air and reverse course, for better spacing or for movement mix-ups while trying to land. This is one of a few reasons why he'd actually be harder to juggle and keep airborne than his floatiness suggests, allowing him to reap the benefits of a slower fall speed, like being harder to combo and having better recovery, without being struck by the downsides as badly. Keep in mind, these stats are all using Smash 4 standards. Ultimate's going to be moving a lot of numbers around, so if you're watching this from the future, just imagine they're whatever Ultimate statistical counterparts are. Or who knows, maybe he's already playable and you can just check his canon stats. Finally, while a lot of characters have some gimmick to help them stand out, I actually don't think Skull Kid needs one. This is a case where his moveset itself does plenty to help him feel unique. Nothing particularly stands out as a natural extension of his identity that beckons including, and there's no need to tack a gimmick on just for the sake of it. But what kind of moveset would this masked madman have? Well, I think Skull Kid's attacks would come in a few different flavors, interspersed throughout his kit to create something varied and unique. Again, while Hyrule Warriors did some interesting stuff, the Smash team wouldn't use it as a point of reference. They'd have their own take on his abilities. First, we have basic attacks Skull Kid would perform entirely under his own power. Stuff like a jab combo consisting of a right-hand punch, a left-hand punch, then a finisher where he pushes the opponent away with both hands. Or an up tilt where he'd swing his arm overhead as if swatting some pest away, or a down tilt where he snatches at something unseen on the ground. He could also have a surprisingly normal grab animation, with a pummel where he backhand slaps whoever he has in his clutches. And that's where anything resembling normal ends. Borrowing Majora's power, several of Skull Kid's attacks would employ dark magic for greater effectiveness. His forward air could have him push forward with one hand and unleash a burst of dark energy at his fingertips. His back air could be the reverse, as he quickly turns around and swings an arm behind him, trailing a ball of darkness along with it for a horizontal slash of sorts. His up smash could have him raise his hand skyward and summon a long-lasting multi-hit dark orb that functioned kinda like Mega Man's up smash, with higher vertical reach but more startup and worse knockback. Or a neutral air where he'd cover himself in one of those orbs for a defensive combo breaker with a long-lasting late hit. You could even have the sphere be semi-transparent and show him curled up in a protective pose. Or how about a down throw where he'd snap his fingers and create multiple dark bursts to damage his victim before sending them flying. Alright, enough darkness talk. How about we also throw in a few attacks where Majora's power comes to the forefront to attack directly. Examples can include a forward smash where tentacles sprout from the sides of the mask and swing inward for a powerful double whip. Or a down smash that forces Skull Kid to spin in place as the same tentacles swirl around him at ground level for multiple hits on either side. Maybe even an up throw where one sprouts from the mask and hurls the opponent skyward. Anytime Majora would act directly, Skull Kid would clutch his head during the animation as if something is causing him pain. But sometimes Majora just wouldn't be content with playing support, as we could also have a few moves where he'd assume direct control and pull Skull Kid around like a puppet. We already have the mask pulling him when he runs, remember, and so his dash attack would have him suddenly lurch forward and tackle anyone in his way as if yanked by a string. A similar animation could also work as his forward throw. And we could give him a ground pound type down air where the mask takes over and drags him to the ground. Could even have Skull Kid's body ragdoll a bit on the way down, as if held up by strings. Finally, his taunts could highlight even more aspects of his background and personality. Stuff like pulling out a flute and playing the first 6 notes of Saria's song, or mocking his opponents just like he does to Link after you spy on him from the Astral Observatory, or even one where the mask would rattle suddenly and he'd get startled and quickly readjust it. Careful there, buddy. Evil is not a toy. So how do we finish this off? For Skull Kid's special moves, we're going to pull from an unlikely source: the 4 Temple Guardians under Majora's thrall. First, at neutral, Odoa's Swarm. The masked jungle warrior is Link's final obstacle to cleansing the waters of Woodfall, and among his many attacks in his boss fight is the ability to summon a swarm of moths to seek the hero out. Channeling that power, Skull Kid would stand in place and gather energy as an image of Odoa's visage appeared before him. Upon release, a cloud of moss would travel forward and deal multiple hits to anyone in their path. The moss materialize in kind of a lengthwise oval-shaped formation, with more of them the longer you hold B, and they'd move at about the speed a charged R-sphere comes out at. But the fun part? They're semi-homing, able to curve a bit to chase after nearby opponents. To an extent, though, they're not just fire and forget. Odoa's Swarm is a useful tool for harassing opponents, forcing approaches, and abusing the upper hand. The moss rack up damage quickly and trap landings exceptionally if you prepare them enough, but their minimal knockback means you aren't going to kill with them, and they aren't much of a threat off stage aside from, well, dealing damage. It's a move with a specific role in mind, not something you fall back on. Skull Kid's side special is a little more action-y: the Goat Charge. This masked mechanical monster is fought at the peak of Snowhead, running around a looping cavern at the temple's highest point that requires Link to chase it down. Borrowing Goat's power allows Skull Kid to charge forward and buck opponents out of his way as a projection of the beast shields him from the front. Not only that, pressing an attack button while you're moving kicks up a rock behind you to hit anyone trying to give chase. Goat Charge gives Skull Kid burst movement and an escape option all in one. Rush in when your opponent does something that leaves themselves open, or use it to get away and kick up a rock to cover your escape. You can also use it in the air, though you'd still descend a little during it, and you could even jump out of it on the ground, albeit with some hang time afterward. It's a defensive move with the occasional use on offense as well. Just use it wisely, especially since Ultimate doesn't let you cross up shields anymore. Skull Kid's recovery move is different. Something we're going to call Leaping Gjorg. Yeah, apparently that's how you pronounce that. Great Bay Temple has been placed under siege by this gargantuan masked fish, an infamous boss fight to finish off an infamous dungeon. On use, Skull Kid makes a stereotypical diving pose, then leaps into the air while guarded in front by an image of Gjorg's remains as the rest of him is covered in a veil of water. Anyone caught in the attack takes multiple hits as they're dragged along into a final blast at the end. The move follows an arc of sorts, ending shortly after Skull Kid starts to go back down, and you can snap to the ledge once you reach the apex of the dive. You can even mix things up and jump out of it if you still have your double jump, though you'd go into free fall as soon as you perform one more attack or action, so careful. Leaping Gjorg is an alright recovery move with some offensive utility. It can get you the rest of the distance to the ledge if necessary, while also dragging botched edgeguard attempts with you. Or you can use its arc to cover platforms and shark your foes in oh so appropriate fashion. Skull Kid's down special borrows from the final temple boss in a more spiritual fashion, with a move we're going to call Twin Mold Titan. These gigantic masked insects prove to be one hell of a challenge to take down, to where Link's best chance of slaying them requires him to don a certain mask and become a giant himself. And it's all of this giant talk that forms the core of this move, as it's a counter with a unique effect. On use, Skull Kid braces himself as Twin Mold's heads surround him, and if he's struck by an attack, he vanishes in a puff of smoke, and an apparition of his foot the size of Bayonetta's smash attacks comes down to stomp the enemy into dust. Make all the Monty Python jokes you want, folks. The strength and duration of the counter would, like so many others, depend on the strength of the attack you blocked from it. Well, sorta. Based on the move you countered, Skull Kid's foot would stomp 1, 2, or 3 times in quick succession, and any hit prior to the final one of each variant would just stun the opponent, so they'd be sure to suffer the full damage and full humiliation. Sure, Twin Mold Titan is just another counter move and only its animation is something completely different, but it does fit Skull Kid's personality and playstyle. Of course he'd have a move that let him lure his opponents into a false sense of security, only to say, "Gotcha!" But for Skull Kid's final smash, the gloves are off. Or something's off at least, as Majora brings about the final hour. With the power of a smash ball unleashed, a flash of darkness from the mask would imprison anyone standing too close by. A cinematic finisher would kick in, as Skull Kid's victims would find themselves transported to the top of Clocktown's famous clock tower, with the moon hanging ominously close overhead. Then Majora's Mask would discard its wearer, assume direct control of the moon, and bring it right down on top of them. A terrible fate indeed. All of this is what Skull Kid could bring to Smash. A strange tandem of childish prankster and unholy entity, combining their efforts to bring chaos and destruction and ruin a few people's days while they're at it. They act as one to pester their foes with flighty tactics while waiting for the right chance to pull the rug out from under them, yet a closer look hints at the pair constantly vying for control over each other. It's enough to make one wonder, just who is the master and who is the mask? Skull Kid's strengths lie in his ability to get in his opponent's heads, using his mix-up heavy moveset to play mind games and undermine their confidence. Furthermore, doing so lets him use his actually pretty great damage output to its fullest, racking up percent with each successful ploy. And his evasive maneuvers, using his aerial drift, dodges, and burst options, give him a much better disadvantage state than his stats would suggest, letting him knock his opponent's plans further off kilter. That said, he kinda relies on mix-ups and reads for his big hits since his actual attacks are on the laggy side, especially when it comes to closing out stocks, as his KO options are either unreliable or unable to kill until late, and if the player controlling Skull Kid starts getting outsmarted themselves, his escape options lose their effectiveness. What do you think of this guy, huh? I admit I didn't have him on my radar until the rumors started, but after taking a closer look, he seems like he'd be a pretty interesting newcomer and there may be a case for him after all. I went into this episode knowing it'd be a risk, since a couple months from now this could all have been debunked brutally and this would just make me seem like little more than some idiot running his mouth. But hey, Majora's Mask is among my favorite Zelda games, and I hope I've done the concept justice for other people who've enjoyed the game or its very unique villain too. That and I kinda wanted to do a concept for someone spooky right about now. 'Tis the season, you know? It's really something how Smash can bring out so many emotions, isn't it? We all get so invested in how each new game and roster turns out. Are there any characters from any of your favorite games you think would make for interesting newcomers? Leave a comment and make your voice heard. I mean, hey, we saw a couple fan favorites upend the odds already. Special thanks for this episode goes to who else but Voyager for his standout performance with this video's graphics. You could say he made the costume for this episode. Thanks as well to all of my patrons for sticking with me this whole way. I've been dealing with an injury on top of my usual issues, so that's why things have been slower lately. If you want to become a patron yourself, check out the link below or wait for the end screen. And so, until next time, and Happy Halloween.